Welcome. Today we're going to talk about baking with einkorn flour. I'm going to share my best tips with you, whether you're new to baking with einkorn or whether you're experienced with baking with einkorn. I hope that you will get something out of this episode and that you will feel free to share with me because we all learn from one another. I firmly believe we all have something to learn from one another. All right, let's get started. In our country and here in the U.S., there are a lot of concerns over gut health because of the contamination of our food supply with GMOs and pesticides and herbicides and all kinds of artificial fillers and different things that are clogging up our food supply. Einkorn wheat is an ancient grain and it has never been hybridized. It has a totally different gluten than, say, any modern wheat variety. So those are the main reasons that it's seeing a resurgence right now. When we first heard about it, my husband was having gut issues and I'd never heard of it before. So I thought it was something new. And I didn't realize that there were bloggers and other people sharing their recipes on the internet for einkorn. So I just got the einkorn flour and began converting my recipes. I had a lot of failures. And so by sharing my best tips with you, I want to help you avoid that huge learning curve and not do the waste that I had to do because it is more expensive than modern wheat because it's not grown real readily here in the U.S. It's gaining popularity, so it is getting easier to get. But for right now, this is where we are. So let's get into my best tips. So a few quick facts. Like we said, it's never been hybridized. It has totally different gluten and proteins than modern wheat. It's higher in protein. It is lower in carbohydrates than modern wheat. It contains carotenoids and B vitamins and crucial trace minerals that modern wheat doesn't have. It has a deep texture, a deep flavor, and a silky texture. I wouldn't say that it's a nutty flavor, but it's akin to a nutty flavor. It really enhances the flavor of anything you're going to bake, in my opinion. Now, it's a healthy, nutritious way to feed those who are counting on you to provide their nutrition. However, the same properties that make einkorn easier on the body make it a little trickier to work with. So let's talk about some of those things. My top tip for einkorn, I have two top ones, but this one edges out the other one just a little. When you're making an einkorn recipe, put all the ingredients together. Let's just say we're making chocolate chip cookies, okay? So you're going to whip your butter, whip your eggs, whip your sugar in there. You're going to add your rising agents. You're going to add your chocolate chips, and then you're going to put your flour in there. Now, you can just put your rising agents in with your flour and then add that to your cookies. But the last thing you're going to add to your mixing bowl is the flour. And then you're going to mix it just until it's combined. Over mixing, over kneading, over processing the recipe is the number one reason for failure with einkorn recipes. So to help avoid that, we're going to add the flour last. Second thing, I got this tip from breadtopia.com, and they have some really helpful tips on there. But I found it to be true for myself, so I'll share it with you. When you're baking with einkorn, say like yesterday, I was making pizza dough. Instead of using flour to work it on the surface when I was spreading out my pizza dough, I dampened my hands with water. If you overflour anything, it's going to be tough and crumbly, but especially einkorn. And that just keeps me from adding extra flour to it to work with it. Sometimes when I'm kneading dough, I will use watered hands instead of flour because you don't want to overmix it. And if you keep adding flour, you have to keep mixing. So those are my two top tips. My third tip, it's not really a tip so much as it is just some information. Most people who talk about using einkorn, they say to weigh the ingredients instead of just measuring it. They say that this is because there's discrepancy in all of the measuring cups from one to the next, and the design and the bevel and different things. And I understand that. But I find that if I stir my flour really well, and most of the time I sift my flour, um, then it turns out just fine without weighing things. Now, I have had some failures, and I do contribute those failures to inaccurate measurements. So, if you want to weigh it, you can. My recipes don't generally call for weights because I don't do that. I don't measure by weights. But if you want to, that's just fine. When substituting whole wheat einkorn flour for all-purpose flour, use 3/4 cups of einkorn whole wheat flour for every 1 cup of all-purpose flour that your recipe calls for. For example, if your recipe calls for 2 cups of all-purpose flour, to use einkorn whole wheat flour as a substitute, you're going to use 1.5 cups of flour, okay? You're also going to increase the amount of liquid in the recipe by 5% because the bran and fiber contained in the whole wheat absorbs more moisture than all-purpose flour. Now, don't worry about trying to remember that. You can shoot over to the blog post, Best Tips for Baking with Einkorn Flour at the Farmer's Lamp, and you can print it out. You can look at it. You can save the post, whatever you need to do to go back and review these. But we have on the Farmer's Lamp an einkorn conversion chart. And we'll try to put the link at the bottom of this video. If you're listening to the podcast, we'll try to put it there. But you can find it on the Farmer's Lamp, einkorn conversion chart. It's available to you free. You can just go and download it. It's got all this information in it, okay? Now, I resist the urge when you're mixing up recipes to add more flour. Your einkorn dough is stickier, okay? So before you add any more liquid, you think it looks different, before you add any flour or any more liquid, let it sit for 10 minutes. Just let it rest for 10 minutes. And then if it's still, you feel like it needs a little more flour, add like a 1/4 cup, okay? If you think it needs more water, just add a tablespoon at a time. If they're real sensitive, you don't want a really wet dough and you don't want a really stiff dough. So by letting it rest that 10 minutes, then you can decide whether or not to add more flour or liquid. Allow your dough to rest 10 minutes between steps. Now, unlike modern wheat flour, einkorn dough is going to be sticky. You're not going to get it smooth and elastic. If you get it smooth and elastic, then you're going to get rock solid product, okay? So just let it rest. Say I mix up my pie crust, I put it in the refrigerator and I let it rest for 10 minutes. Then I roll it out and do it like usual. When I'm making tortillas, I do the same thing. I mix it up, I roll them into their little balls, and then I let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes. And then I roll them out and cook them. So biscuits, I don't let my biscuit dough sit 10 minutes. I do let it rest for like 5 minutes while I'm getting the bacon going or the sausage or whatever I'm fixing with it while the oven's warming up, and then I stick them in there. Okay, so, 5 minutes or so is about all I do for my biscuits. But as a general rule, let it sit for 10 minutes. Bread doughs, when you're making bread with einkorn flour, they generally don't need the kneading. Now, this was the hugest mental block because I make all of our bread. This was a huge mental block for me to get past because I'm used to kneading 10 to 12 minutes to get the gluten active. Einkorn, you cannot do that. 3 to 4 minutes, if at all, is all the kneading that einkorn flour. It's the gluten. The gluten is totally different. Excuse me. So that's why you don't have to do that. Do I use a stand mixer? I've been asked this a lot. Yes. I love my KitchenAid, as anyone who has a KitchenAid does. However, there's a real danger, especially when you first start working with einkorn flour, there's a real danger of over mixing. So when someone is just starting out using einkorn and they are working with me, or I'm working with them, helping them get started, I say don't use your stand mixer. Get used to the einkorn dough. If you're willing to stand right there and watch it real closely and have a timer on you so that you know, okay, it's been 3 minutes if you're kneading, or if it's mixing, you're watching it. Okay, it's just incorporated, and turn it off. If you're willing to do that and dedicate that careful attention to it, then by all means do that. But like I said, I was shocked by how little kneading and mixing it requires. You only mix the ingredients until they're just combined, unless your recipe says so. Now, like my einkorn flour cake recipes, 10 minutes of mixing, okay? Because you're putting air in there. Einkorn is an ancient grain. It's got a different gluten. It's a little heavier, so you want a lot of air in there. So unless your recipe says to mix for a certain amount of time, then just until it's combined is all you want to do. As it has different gluten, so because of that, when you're letting a dough rise, normally it'll say let it rise until doubled in size. That could be an hour, that could be an hour and a half. With einkorn flour, overproving is the enemy. So you only let your dough rise until it's 40 to 50% bigger. You don't want it to double, because it's going to collapse if you do that. Okay. So 40 to 50% bigger, and then it's ready to go, ready to work with. Especially when you're working with yeasted breads. Okay. If you're a sourdough lover like me, then you're going to be happy with the einkorn flour results using sourdough. It is amazing. It takes it up such another notch. And you can find our einkorn flour sourdough, well, that's a mouthful, sourdough starter on the Farmer's Lamp. And we've got bread recipes on there too. So you can find that there on the Farmer's Lamp. You'll know your bread is ready for baking, just like normal dough. When you press your thumb into it gently and it springs back, then you know that it's ready to go in the oven. Einkorn has a lower starch than modern wheat. So when you're making a cake, I add an extra egg. Now, if you're using a recipe that's specifically for einkorn, which I totally recommend, when you're first starting out and learning, I always say use a recipe that's designed for einkorn. Learn how it works, see the difference in your favorite recipe and the einkorn recipe, and make adjustments. And once you're comfortable, then start converting your favorite recipes. But when you're first starting out, that's what I say. So, but if you're converting a recipe, add an extra egg. You're going to get a lighter cake than with, say, my cake, my lemon pound cake that I love to make. It calls for 4 eggs. Now, just to make a regular one, the original recipe I had, it said 3 eggs. So I added an extra egg, and it just made a lighter, fluffier cake. It's made a huge difference, okay? I do not use coconut oil in my einkorn recipes. Now, I know that's a shock because I am a huge coconut oil user. I mean, we have a jug in the bathroom so we can do oil pulling. We have a jug in the kitchen for cooking. We have a jug outside in the feed shed for the animals. So we use coconut oil all over the farm. And I have researched, and I cannot determine the scientific reason why. But anything that you bake with einkorn that you use coconut oil in, it just turns out bad. It cracks, it's crumbly, it doesn't hold together. So I say lard or grass-fed butter. Most of the time I use butter, but I do have some grass-fed lard from one of the hogs here on the farm. So I do use that too. And either one of those, you're going to get a fantastic result. We have on the Farmer's Lamp einkorn recipes. If you're not familiar with what einkorn is and some of the health benefits of einkorn, we have a post on that for you. I think we just released our carrot cake recipe. My husband has that every year for Thanksgiving. So I made that for him, and it just is such a fantastically moist and decadent cake. So if you are a carrot cake lover and you're looking to make einkorn, switch to einkorn or make it with einkorn, you're going to love that recipe. I hope these tips not only give you the confidence to start baking with einkorn flour, but also spark excitement for trying something new in the kitchen. Remember, working with einkorn is just a little different. It's not complicated. So embrace the ancient grain as a new way of providing nutrition for your family. Allow yourself the grace of trial and error. Even I said I had a lot of failures, and I did when I first started out, but we ate them anyway because we're not real picky, we're not wasters, and they still tasted good. They weren't perfect, but they still tasted good. So allow yourself to fail a little bit. I understand that wasting ingredients is tough on the family grocery budget. And that is, especially now, right? So that is why I designed these tips to help you minimize the waste and maximize your success. So for the best results, I recommend sticking to recipes that are crafted especially for einkorn flour, unless you're an experienced einkorn user. You're going to be pleasantly surprised how many recipes are out there available for einkorn flour. Until next time, dive in and happy baking with Einkorn.